in the book of Ezra. We got down to chapter 4 last week, and so tonight we're going to be beginning the fourth chapter of Ezra. When we get to the end of, if memory serves me correctly, the end of chapter 6, we're going to switch over to Esther, and then when we finish Esther, we'll come back and finish Ezra. That's the chronological order of these two particular books. But we're also going to be looking at a few other books, just very quickly, just some readings out of them, to give us just a little bit of background that takes place. So if you'll open your Bibles to Ezra, the fourth chapter, with me, we're going to begin reading verses 1 through 5 to start the study tonight. Verse 1, Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers, and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do. And we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Ashur, which brought us up hither. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, Ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our God, but we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, hath commanded us. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And so we begin by asking the question, who are these adversaries? They are not specifically identified in this, but the inspiration does give us the concept when you drop down to verse 2. Notice that it says that we do sacrifice unto him, to God, since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Ashur. Now, who do you think that would be? That's the Samaritans. These are the people that we've talked about that were brought into the land of Israel to replace those who were taken out of the land of Israel. The whole purpose was to get them to mix up together and intermarry and create a people, and they're called Samaritans. The Jews hated the Samaritans. In the days of Jesus and even well before that time, they hated the Samaritans. They considered them a mixed race of people that were not following the God of heaven and his marriage rules. Now remember, there were very strict marriage rules under the law of Moses. They were not allowed to marry outside of God's family, the chosen people. There were some exceptions made to that rule, and by God himself, obviously, because, for instance, Ruth was a Moabitist, and she is in the lineage of Jesus Christ. That could not have happened without God's allowing it to happen. And when you look into Matthew chapter 4, you'll see several women who were outside of the lineage of Abraham. They were not Jews. For instance, another one that we might look at would be Bathsheba. Bathsheba was not a Jew. So who are these adversaries? They are the Samaritans, the mixed race of Jews and heathen who, in their worship, not only did they violate the laws of God with regard to marriage under the law of Moses, but they also began mixing their religions up with all of these heathen religions, idol worship, that were involved in all of these other nations that they were mixed with. So it became a mixture of pagan worship with Judaism. And when the northern 10 tribes were taken by the Assyrians, God let something happen to the land. He told them, when you're taken by these people, He was going to allow the wild beasts to overcome the land. And so even though many people were moved into the area, many people were also exported to other areas, and the land became fallow. What happens to land when human beings don't deal with it all the time? It quickly goes back, doesn't it? How many times have you passed down the road and seen a house that somebody abandoned 30 or 40 years ago? And you look and you see trees, maybe some of them growing up through the house or out in the yard, and it's unkept. It returns to basically nature. Well, God said that's what's going to happen, only it's going to be wild animals that are going to be inhabiting the land. He named lions among others. And this became a great problem, because when people start mixing with wild animals, what happens? People get killed, don't they? They get eaten by wild animals. And there was a big problem that was taking place. It's either, you either eat the wild animal or it eats you. Now, Esarhaddon was an Assyrian king. It calls it Asher in our present text in the New King, or the King James. And he commanded the Israelite priest, now watch this, he commanded the Israelite priest to go and instruct the people in the region about the God of their land, 2 Kings 17:24. Now think about that. Who were these Israelite priests? They were the very ones who had been taken into captivity by the Assyrians, and they had convinced the people of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, long ago, to worship idols. Remember a calf at the very beginning when the 10 tribes of Israel separated from Judah and Benjamin? Remember that immediately the very first king that they had, what did he do? He set up 2 golden calves. One in the north of the 10 tribes territory and one in the south of the 10 tribes territory. And the priests of those lands, most of them went along with it. And so what do you think is going to happen? Well, it's going to evolve as it goes along, and you're going to accept more and more of heathen idolatry worship until you get a king named Ahab and his wife Jezebel. And what did they do? They introduced Baal big time, the worship of Baal. Now, the word Baal, it's a designation that many times falls into kind of a nebulous kind of thing where they kind of mix them up a little bit, but usually Baal was the chief god of most of these nations. They may have been called by a different name, but still it was Baal behind the scenes. So remember, Esarhaddon sent these priests down. Well, what do you think they're going to teach these Samaritan people? They're going to teach them only about Jehovah? Or are they going to teach them the religion that they had been developing all of this time? Yeah, you got the picture. And so these priests, he sent back their descendants, they were the descendants of those who had corrupted Israel's worship in the first place. And it's going to continue. Josephus tells us, the historian Josephus, if you're not familiar with him, he was a Jewish general in the fight against Rome. And when his particular army was basically destroyed, they drew lots, the few that were left, to decide who would kill each other all the way down until whoever number one was would go ahead and commit suicide. Well, guess who the one that ended up number one was? It was Josephus. Did he follow through by committing suicide? No, he didn't do it. Instead, he ran to the Romans, and he made a prediction to the Roman general, commander of the armies that were trying to destroy Jerusalem and conquer and stop the rebellion that Israel had got involved in. And guess who this ruler was? Or this general was? Vespasian, whose son was Titus. Now, he told Vespasian, you are going to become emperor of Rome. And that's why Vespasian didn't kill him. Normally, Vespasian would have nailed him to a cross and hung him out to dry, so to speak. But he didn't, because of the prediction that Vespasian made. He kind of wanted to see what's going to happen. Will I really? And lo and behold, Vespasian was called back to Rome while he was in the midst of the siege of Jerusalem to become emperor. And his son Titus then took over the armies that surrounded Jerusalem to destroy Jerusalem, to finish the conquering. And by the way, Titus later became an emperor himself, the emperor, followed his father. Josephus became a historian, and he was always trying to place the Jews in a good light before the Romans. So you have to be careful of the histories that he wrote. But his histories have come down to us in a number of books and tell us an awful lot about things that took place back then. Josephus tells us that Alexander the Great, in his conquering, paid for the building of a temple for the Samaritan people on a mountain called Mount Gerizim. Now, does that ring a bell? You remember that Jesus, when he journeyed toward Galilee, passed through the land of the Samaritans. He came to a particular well. He sent his disciples, his apostles, out to get food and bring it back because he was tired and he was hungry. The text tells us all of that. And while they were gone to get the food and things for the master and for themselves, a Samaritan woman came down to the well. Remember that? And do you remember that she started asking him questions, and he started answering them. And slowly he revealed to her that he was the Messiah. Interesting that he would do that. The reason it's interesting is because she could not be a legal witness in a court of law who would try to convict Jesus of blasphemy because he said he was the Messiah. But he told her that he was. I'm the one that you've been looking for. And one of the questions that she asked was, we worship in Mount Gerizim, and you Jews, you worship in Jerusalem. Which is right? Of course, Jesus told her the truth. It's right to worship in Jerusalem, not on Mount Gerizim. You see the connection here? Why were the Samaritans in Jesus' day worshiping on Mount Gerizim? Because that's where a temple had been built through the funds of Alexander the Great to allow them to have a place to worship. This mixed worship of heathenism and Judaism, the true worship. Later, John Hyrcanus in 28 BC destroyed that temple that had been built. So by the time of Jesus, and talking to this Samaritan woman, there was no temple there any longer, but they were still worshiping in that place. Now, from this point on, those who attempted to serve God are going to face adversaries. And these adversaries are going to be these Samaritan people. And you're going to see why, or one of the major reasons, I should say, not this is a total answer, one of the major reasons why they tried to disrupt the rebuilding of this temple in the text that we just read. Notice it says the adversaries of who? Who were they the adversaries of? Judah and Benjamin. Why? Because Judah and Benjamin made up Judah when the separation became between the 10 tribes to the north, known as Israel, and the 2 to the south, known as Judah. That's the division that was created during the time or after Solomon's death. Now, Judah and Benjamin represented those who had come from Persia. There were others that came, other people from the other tribes of original Israel did move back with these people. But primarily, it was the people from Judah who made up the tribes of Judah and Benjamin by birth. And they want to, these adversaries, they say, let us build with you. Well, that sounds kind of noble, doesn't it? Let us build with you. You know, we seek your God too. Oh yeah, they sought Jehovah God, but they also sought Baal, and they also sought Bel, and they also sought all these other false gods. They had developed a pantheon like heathenism, like you see in Babylon and Persia, etc. All of those people worshiped many gods. Today, I can't help but think of the Hindus. When we were on the island of Bali, Jenny got to go with me one time on my mission works to Indonesia. And when we were on the island of Bali, Bali is basically a Hindu island in Indonesia. There are Muslims there too, but they are in the minority. It's mostly Hindu. And you can't go anywhere without seeing the evidence of their false gods. They build these places to worship these gods like a pyramid, only going up like a tower, and on these things will be heads and images of all these various gods, and they don't even know how many they have. Nobody in Hinduism knows how many gods they actually have. Jenny asked me one time, we were driving on one of the roads, and there's this big boulder, and it had a checkered, black and white checkered, it's called a skirt, they call it, around it. That represented a god. That boulder was a god. So they said, we seek your God. Oh, they did, but they sought him along with all of these others that they worshiped too. They said, we sacrifice to your God. Yeah, but they also sacrificed to Baal and Bel and all of these other false gods. And by the way, when they sacrificed to Jehovah, when they sought Jehovah, they had made him no different than the idols that they also worshiped. He was just another god to them. And they said in our text, we've done this ever since Esarhaddon. We've been doing this forever. We've been worshiping your God. We've been making sacrifices to him. Now, let's ask a question. If they had been sincere about building the temple to Jehovah, Jehovah only, why hadn't they done it long ago? Hundreds of years have passed. Why didn't they do it a long time ago? You see, they weren't sincere. And Zerubbabel and Jeshua refused these people's help. Now, Zerubbabel was the governor of this territory by decree of the Persian king. Jeshua is the high priest, a legitimate high priest, not a phony like the ones the Samaritans would have had. And Zerubbabel and Jeshua refused these people's help. Why? Well, you see, if they had accepted their help, it would have compromised the Jews in their true worship. It would have resulted in failure. Now let's ask a question here. Jehovah has never accepted compromise. Sometimes I've heard members of the Lord's church say, well, you know, these people in these other religious groups, why they are fighting abortion, and we ought to join them in that fight. We don't have to accept their beliefs, their false religions. Does that tell us anything? If we compromise and do that, we're going to fail. We're going to fail. We ought to oppose things like abortion, etc., just because they're wrong, and do it ourselves. But do not compromise and join with these other religious groups, because we'll fail. They will look at us as no more and no different than themselves. You're just as good as we are. We're just as good as you are. And God has never accepted that. And Zerubbabel and Jeshua the high priest understood that. And so they said, no, you are not going to help us in this work. There's not a whole lot worse than a half-converted person in religion. It's not much worse at all, because they act as a Trojan horse. Oh, they may not intend to, but they will act as a Trojan horse, trying to get people to do things that they had done in their former religion. And over the years, I've seen it time after time after time. I'm going to try and get them to do something that God wouldn't approve of. Proverbs 27 and verse 6 fits these compromisers that we see in our text perfectly. Because when they first come, they say, oh, we worship your God. We make sacrifices to your God. We're doing the same thing you are. What does Proverbs 27:6 say? The kisses of an enemy are deceitful. You see, they're trying to cozy up to, we worship the same God you do, so why shouldn't we help you? The truth is, they did not worship the same God that they did. Observe something. They didn't become the enemies of God after their help was refused. Look at the text. It begins with they were the adversaries. When the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, they haven't been denied helping the folks from Judah and Benjamin right yet, have they? They were already adversaries when they initially approached Zerubbabel and Jeshua with their proposition, let us help build your temple to Jehovah. They had not openly expressed the fact that they were adversaries, but Jeshua and Zerubbabel knew that if they let them helped them build that temple, they were going to cause trouble. Let's ask another question, though. Were Zerubbabel and Joshua opposed to outside help of any kind? And the answer is no. Bob, how do you say that? Well, didn't they accept help from Cyrus when he made the proclamation to go back and rebuild their temple to your God and rebuild Jerusalem? Didn't they accept help from him? Oh, didn't they ask for and receive, according to Nehemiah, timbers from Lebanon? And didn't they accept his giving them back all of the utensils that they would need for worship? And didn't they accept other things from him, protection, etc.? Yeah. Well, what's the difference? You see, the Persian help was not going to try and stop the work of rebuilding the temple and Jerusalem. But the book of Nehemiah clearly shows that these Samaritans, they wanted to stop this building. They wanted to disrupt it. They wanted to slow it down. Look at verse 4. It shows their real intent. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building. Now they let it be seen what they really were, the enemies of Benjamin and Judah, the enemies of Jehovah. So they now took a proactive position against Israel. They let it be known now who they really were, what they really were. And they hired, first of all, they hired lobbyists, what we would call lobbyists today, against Benjamin and Judah and the work they're trying to do. In other words, they got some lawyers together and they said, now, you go to the king for us. They wanted the covenant that the Jews had received from Cyrus to be annulled. We don't want them rebuilding this temple to the God of heaven. We don't want them rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. I'm not going to get into a lot of the reasons there, but they were afraid of the Jews, basically. The word weakened comes from the word rapha, and what it refers to is to slacken, to make them not do as much as they could do. It also has the idea of to sink. Now think about that. The idea of sink is like a ship. You sink the ship. I was reading a book about the Vikings in recent times, and this Viking ship got in a battle with another ship of another group, and this other group had a bigger ship and a whole lot more warriors on it, and so the smaller ship, the smaller warship, the commander of it sent some of his best men to get on the other ship and to chop a hole in the bottom of it. Now, why did he do that? Chop the hole in the bottom of it, the ship starts to sink, and all of those soldiers on that ship, guess what? They sink too. That's the idea of this word sink, to sink, to dishearten them. Imagine how disheartened those Viking sailors were when their ship starts sinking, and they know that's going to cause them to die. The same thing is being done by these Samaritans to the descendants of Benjamin and Judah. They're trying to dishearten them, to discourage them, to stop them from finishing the work. The word trouble comes from the word bahal. And the people, they're troubling the people. They're disturbing them. That's what the meaning of the word is. To alarm them. They wanted to terrify them. Well, how would you do that? Well, there are a lot of different ways they could do it. They could kill some of the people. They could pull down the work that they did in the nighttime. There are all kinds of ways. They wanted them to be alarmed. They wanted the people to be anxious. They wanted them to be afraid. When you study the book of Nehemiah, what did Nehemiah do to combat that? He armed all of the workers so that they were to work with one arm, figuratively speaking, one arm holding a sword and the other arm doing the building. In other words, you stay armed all the time. Be ready to fight, but keep building. Verse 5 shows us the extent to which they were willing to go to stop this temple from being built, to stop Jerusalem from being rebuilt. They hired these counselors against them to frustrate their purpose. All the days of Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, Cyrus had given the command, but after that, as he lived, that's the time in which they hired these counselors, these lawyers, to try and stop this work. And their work of trying to stop the temple and the walls of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, from being rebuilt spanned 4 emperors, starting with Cyrus. The final one is Darius that we're going to be noticing. The temple reconstruction was started in 537 BC, according to Ezra 3 and verse 8. The Samaritans' efforts would have continued at least until 521 BC, when Darius came to the throne of Persia and included in his reign for at least a period of time. The work of rebuilding the temple had been halted now for 16 years, from the time that the counselors had been sent to Cyrus trying to stop this rebuilding. And during this time, these Benjamites and Judites, they had been building their own houses, but they stopped building the temple. They stopped building the walls of the city. And that brings us to verses 6 through 16. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes wrote Bishlam and Meredath, Tabeel, and the rest of their companions unto Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the writing of the letter was written in the Syrian tongue and interpreted in the Syrian tongue. Rehum, the chancellor, and Shimshai, the scribe, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, the king, in this sort, or according to this manner. Then wrote Rehum, the chancellor, and Shimshai, the scribe, and the rest of their companions, the Danites, and the Aphrasites, and the Tarpelites, and the Arpharsites, and the Achivites, and the Babylonians, the Sanchitites, and the Dehivites, and the Alamites. Anybody want to say it 10 times real quick? And the rest of the nations whom the great and noble Asnap brought over and set in the cities of Samaria, and the rest that were in this side of the river, and at such a time. This is the copy of the letter that they sent unto him, even unto Artaxerxes the king, thy servants the men on this side of river, and at such a time be it known unto the king, that the Jews which came up from thee to us are come up unto Jerusalem, building the rebellious and the bad city, and have set up the walls thereof, and joined the foundations. Be it known now unto the king, that if this city is builded, and the walls set up again, then will they not pay toll, taxes, tribute, and custom, and so thou shalt endamage the revenue of the kings. Now, because we have maintenance from the king's palace, and it was not meet for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore have we sent and certified the king, that search may be made in the book of the records of the fathers. So shalt thou find in the book of the records, and know that this city is a rebellious city, and hurtful unto the kings and provinces, and that they have moved sedition within the same of old time, for which cause was this city destroyed. We certify the king, that if this city be builded again, and the walls thereof set up, by this means thou shalt have no portion on this side of the river. The opposition to the Jews gets organized. Oh boy, we got to stop this. We've got to give the king all kinds of reasons, even though they're false, to believe that these Jews are dangerous and they've got to be stopped. Does that sound like to the modern day? Anytime something good that God would approve of is advocated, we see people all the time bringing up all kinds of excuses today, and it's always been this way, to try and stop the good from being done. So they first write a letter to Ahasuerus. This is the name we know him by better is Xerxes. And at the best, this seems to cause a little bit of delay in the building. It seems to slow it down, where they're not really actively involved and quickly trying to get this building put up, but it's slowing it down. So you might as well say it's not even been built. And when Artaxerxes came to the throne in 465 BC, this opposition became more intense. And it appears that Artaxerxes, he had gained the throne of Persia by usurpation. And he didn't stay there very long. And that usurpation of the throne caused a lot of unrest in the empire. So you can see how the time period fits right in here, and why a ruler of Persia would take this kind of serious, that these people might rise up in rebellion again. There's a lot of unrest. He's got to try and stop that unrest. But he didn't last very long. He was assassinated after 7 months of usurping the throne. But it makes the time ideal to accuse the Jews of rebellion. These two possibilities, there are two possibilities, I should say, with regard to what this side of the river means. It could mean west of the Euphrates, because the capital of Persia was on the east side of Euphrates, or it could refer specifically to the west side of the Jordan River. And I believe it probably is referring to that. This area of land that is west of the Jordan, but it could very well be this side of the Euphrates River. All of this land, you won't have any control over it, because the Jews will gain control. That was the implication of what they're saying. And since Jerusalem was west of the Jordan, that makes it even more precise in my way of thinking, that it's talking about the west side of the Jordan River, this side of Jordan, or the river rather. Now verse 8 is an accusation against the Jews as that temple has taken a major part of rebuilding. But again, it's not finished. It's not close to being finished. You ever notice how I've been watching a house that's being built fairly close to where we live right now, and this house, man, it went up after they got the concrete laid, and that concrete was allowed to set in so many days, and so it could make the foundation. Man, that outer building went up quick. Have you ever noticed that? And then the outside rough siding had been put all over to keep it from the weather. Man, it went up quick. Well, after that got done, it's been almost a month, and they're still working on the inside and haven't got the outside all finished or any of the rest. It takes a whole lot longer to finish, right? Well, that's the same thing the temple was going through. The time here is approximately 445 BC, when the walls of Jerusalem had been being rebuilt. Two charges are thus leveled against the Jews. Number one, Jerusalem has always been a rebellious city. Well, if you look into the records of the recent times, they would have been telling them that, or the king of Persia, the emperor of Persia, well, yeah, the Jews were always rebellious against the Assyrians. That was for hundreds of years. You can go back to 2 Kings chapter 18. Even the writings of the Jews recorded that they'd been rebellious against them. 2 Chronicles 23. Secondly, they could have looked at the recent history of Babylon. And in 2 Kings chapter 24 through 25, the rebellions of Jerusalem against the Babylonians had been recorded time and time again. By the way, there were 4 rebellions. The final one led to the absolute destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Nebuchadnezzar, in leading his armies against Jerusalem, had not totally destroyed the temple or the city itself, the city walls. In the first rebellion, the second rebellion, or the third rebellion, in which he had taken captives back, all 3 of those. But they rebelled again when he put a governor over them, and that governor rebelled. All recorded in the Kings and the Chronicles of God's people themselves, not just the Babylonians. The rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar had finally led to the absolute destruction of Jerusalem. The second charge brought against them involved finances, and that's where we'll pick up next week.